Hi everyone, you're listening to the Bridgeway podcast. The purpose of these podcasts is to give us the opportunity to share information and thoughts with you and to inspire all of you who work at Bridgeway. As ever, we'd love to hear from you, so if you've got any feedback, please get in touch.
Hi everyone, and welcome to part one of this very special edition of the Bridgeway podcast. And today I'm joined by Pino DeRosa, RMD, and Brian Maddison, who co-founded Bridgeway 30 years ago alongside Andy Jones. I've really been looking forward to this one. I've got so much to talk about. We've decided to record this one in two parts because there is a lot to go through. But first, how are you both?
Yeah, not bad, thanks.
Good to be back, Brian?
Yes, yeah, it is actually.
Pino?
Yeah, I'm all right. I'm
You're
recovering from my replacement hip, so all's good.
All good.
Looking up, yeah.
So, the 1st of April marks 30 years since Bridgeway started. Where did you first meet? Because obviously you didn't meet on the 1st of April. You met before then, didn't you?
Yeah, I can remember meeting. I think I'll probably remember meeting Brian more than he'll remember meeting me, but...
Oh, I remember meeting you.
Go on then,
yeah.
where did we...
Well, my recollection is the fact that your brother pestered me for weeks to see you because he wanted you to move up from being a labourer to an apprentice bricklayer. And I wasn't very keen only because Pino was a couple of years older than we would have normally started an apprentice. Yeah. And there weren't many apprenticeships available anyway. But anyway, he twisted my arm, and that's where I'm pretty sure that's the first time I met Pino. It's the first time I remember it anyway.
Yeah. Well, I was on a temporary contract at Lenton Central Material Depot as a junior trackman on a temporary contract, and I was in the pub, the Three Bridges pub, on a Friday afternoon, and with my brother. And Brian was there from Furlong House, and my brother said, "That's the guy that might give you a job if you're lucky enough." So I think he came along and introduced me, but Brian, was probably sort of
I'd probably had a couple of drinks by then.
You'd had a couple of drinks. Brian probably wouldn't have realised who I was at that point, but Andy was trying to get me in front of Brian.
Yeah. And did you start working together at BR then?
You wouldn't say together because Pino came on as an apprentice bricklayer and I was already in Furlong House.
Yeah.
But gradually over the first few years we bumped into each other. Yeah. I remember a couple of tunnel jobs where I came in and you were apprentice bricklayer, and we talked about replacing brick arches and things together and so on. So
how did Bridgeway come about then? When did you first start talking about that?
My recollection of it was having been part of British Rail and I'd left as a freelance engineer in 1994. We would every now and again, as ex-BR divers, have a rub of the stones on a Monday night once a month, Bryn, at the Victoria Inn next to Nottingham Station, and a few pints of beer. And Brian happened to mention on one occasion that he'd applied for his redundancy, and I just laughed it off internally, thinking there's no chance that they're going to let Brian Maddison go. Yeah. He's far too energetic, knows far too much, and has got so much value to add to the rail industry. But anyway, Brian said that he'd applied for his redundancy package, and then the next time we met at the pub, about a month or two later, I asked Brian quite flippantly how his application had gone. And he said, it's been granted. And it was just this boom sort of thing of, what? We're going to let you go. And then I remember saying to Brian, well, what are you going to do then if you retire? Well, if you leave, you take voluntary severance. And
what were you going to do, Brian?
Well, just to step back a bit, I was a manager down at Peterborough, and leading up to privatisation, we've been encouraged to make sure our team was ready to go into private industry and this sort of thing. And I'd done an awful lot of work on it, and I got a really good group of people. And then all of a sudden, just before it came about, the new manager who came in said to me, "We don't want you. We don't want your team. Your people can be replaced straight away by contractors." And that was the point that I made. I knew I was going to go and do something else because I wasn't going to be shunted along like that. And that's when I decided, I think, definitely I would go with Pino and Andy and do what we've been talking about.
Yeah. So when did AJ come into the mix then?
Well, we were all at the pub. So there was Brian, me, AJ, Nigel Stockdale, Colin Tigg, Graham Williams, I think Brian Garner, and I think Gordon Issett might have been there. I'm not sure whether Gordon was there, but there was this conversation, and Brian said, "Well, I'm thinking." I was saying, "What are you going to do?" And Brian said, "I'm thinking of setting up a business to do underwater bridge inspections." And he looked at me and said, "Are you interested?" And I went, "Yeah, I am." And AJ, without even being asked to come in, and that was it. And that was the three of us, and we'd.
So it was like a joint decision. There wasn't one of you that said, right, we're going to do it.
Brian was the catalyst.
Yeah.
Brian leaving was like that major sort of stepping thing of, Brian's leaving and he's going to set up this going concern. I'd only just 3 months after getting married and having started freelance engineering, so quite a big step for me. I was doing quite well at the time, working as a freelance engineer on the jewellery line rehab project, which was Snow Hill to Smethwick Galton Bridge, and it was quite exciting work. Andy worked at Derby Research, and Brian was leaving Eastern Region.
Yeah. It was just the right time.
Scary for me.
Yeah.
Because I'd still got a wedding to pay for. That was still on TIG technically. The house had got bare plastered walls, no skirtings, no architraves, no paint, no floor coverings and no ceiling in the hallway. So there was a lot to do there.
It's a big risk.
And I went home and said to Carolyn, this wage that I've got coming in every month, it's not going to come into our joint account anymore. It's going to go into this account.
So what did Carolyn say?
She backed me. She backed me quite surprisingly, really. Because it's quite a scary thing. We were both at work, but it was early days. But it was.
What about Ina, Brian?
Yeah, she was fine with it. Yeah. I mean, I think she saw the fact that she might see a bit more of me because, of course, we first set up the office in the extension to my house. So, but she did. But another aspect at the time was my boss on BR had encouraged me about 3-4 years before to go into becoming a chartered engineer under the mature candidate. And that was quite key to the company because the exams we did had to be signed off by a chartered engineer, and that was quite key as well to being able to set the company up.
So is it something you both always wanted to do in terms of having your own business, or did it just sort of evolve into that? Or
as far as I'm concerned, not really. I dabbled with the idea. We talked about it, but frankly, I was really happy working for British Railways, and had it not been for privatisation, I think I would have stayed there because it was a most enjoyable job. So that was the catalyst, really.
Yeah. What about you, Pino?
I was always entrepreneurial, but I think, like Brian, I enjoyed being part of the railways, despite the fact that when I left, my dad was a railwayman, and he's the reason why I worked on the railways, because he encouraged me to leave the job I was in and join British Rail on the basis of, look, just go and get a job because you can move, you can grow within the industry. It's got lots of different opportunities, and that's what I did. I was always entrepreneurial. I did feel in British Rail days that things moved a bit too slowly in BR. So I guess my behind the scenes plan was to, develop myself, but then at some point leave and do something where there's a bit more merit for effort. Yeah. But the reality was that it came to me because when privatisation came along, it just threw everything into the air. Yeah. And you were in this place where all the old structures had been torn apart, and there was some stuff that was really good that British Rail did that got thrown out, but then there was this opportunity to go and do something new, and everything I guess that I liked about that whole meritocracy and entrepreneurialism was thrown suddenly thrown at me and thrown at us, and it was for me a bit scary at the time, because I mean AJ was straight in, and he didn't like his job at Derby Research, and he'd been left an inheritance by his gran.
So where did the name come from? Who came up with Bridgeway?
Well, I think it took more meetings to decide on that name than anything else before. We kept going round to each other's house in the evening and talking about the name. But in the end, it's just simple. It's a combination of bridges and railway.
Yeah.
But we did talk a long time about it.
Did you have other names? Were there other names?
DeRosa, Jones, Maddison, Jones, DeRosa, Jones, Maddison, DeRosa. There was all this permutation. I remember there's a US company called Amway.
Yeah.
That used to sell products, and I always thought that the whole Amway thing was apparently the American way. And I did martial arts, and there's this thing called Karate Do, which is the way of karate. And then we were doing this company that was going to inspect bridges, and it was, for me, as that thing of, well, we're going to do bridges in the railways, but we could also do bridges in highways and waterways. So threw it into the mix once, and it was I remember the first time it getting mentioned, it was like, no, that's no good. And then we meet again, because at this point the lawyers and the accountants are saying, look, this business that you've got
to have a name for it. Absolutely, they were,
and then it was like, well, what was that? What was it? We had a little list. I can't find a journal, but somewhere there's this journal of all these permutations.
Yeah.
And then we just settled on Bridgeway, didn't we?
What about the logo as well? Who came up with that?
Again, we messed about drawing it, and that's not the original logo.
No.
Caroline designed the logo.
The original one?
Yeah.
But
it looked a bit textile-y. It was just half a bridge arch and some water.
Yeah, I mean, it was...
Oh, I think I've seen that.
Yes, it was a bridge arch. And so, if you like, the present logo was sort of an advancement on that, wasn't it? It evolved to that.
Because the designer that did the industrial archaeologist,
Ron Fitzpatrick. So there was another story, because it was a nightmare.
So
lovely bloke.
Ron Fitzpatrick had a designer that designed his brochure, and we gave our logo to our existing logo that Caroline designed, which was very textile-y. Yeah. And we gave it to Ron's designer, who came up with
that. Yeah.
New design, and it was interesting because the part of the bridge that Caroline used in the original design, I think visually she took that from Greece, from the movie, when they're racing down that aqueduct thing.
Yeah.
Really?
Spillway, because it was like, well, what because she's a textile designer, not a bridge person. Yeah. But that was her representation of a bridge with some water flowing under it.
Yeah.
It's just
and what about the colours then? Were they just from the designers as well?
Those. And it was interesting because I mean the concept of the arch, because the bridge arch was always there, but I remember the designer sort of saying actually that bridge arch, the crescent on the Bridgeway logo could be a signal. Yeah. But it could be a train wheel, it could be an arch.
It could be going into a tunnel. It could be the sun rising.
Yeah, so it just, we settled on it. Base 9 font, remember that? Yeah. That was picked out.
So at the start, what was your biggest challenge, do you think?
Once we started, I think the biggest challenge initially was getting some work in, really. I was absolutely no good at that. I mean, we were getting a bit of income because Pino was already working on the jewellery line, but I was going to see people I knew up in York and that sort of thing and talking to them. I was just hopeless. I used to get frustrated and so, that was quite a challenge. Yeah. In the end, that soon picked up because the word got around that there was a little company there at Bridgeway who could get you out of trouble in a way. That I think was the biggest early challenge, at least.
Yeah.
What do you think, Pino?
Yeah, I'd agree, Bryn. I mean, but you had a chance meeting with Terry Everall on...
Oh, I did.
Was that Peterborough? Or New
it's probably York, I think.
York,
I'm not sure where I first came up with him. But
Terry Everall had been at the Regional Civil Engineers office in York, and Terry had just taken a job as the rail director for White Young, which was a mainstream civil engineering consultancy, and Terry was going to be delivering engineering services to Railtrack, and he needed people who could get stuff done and that knew how to operate safely on the railway. And Brian told him that we'd set up, and it was, that was one of the...
then that was another new challenge then, wasn't it, to find the people to fill the jobs.
Find the people, yeah.
I think we've always had that mindset, though. If we get the work, then look for the work.
Absolutely,
absolutely,
yeah.
I mean, for me, big challenge for me with personal was just how precarious financially my world was at that point. And I've got, Carol and I've just got married in the August 1994, and we set the business up on the 1st of April the year later. And in that period, I'd left British Rail, who had worked for 9 years, and then found myself freelancing, and then go and set up a business with two people. And from a personal point of view, I had to work really hard mentally to make that call. And I remember telling myself, it'll work, and it's worth. We've got to do this. Got to do this. You trust these two guys. We've got to give it a go.
Yeah. And it was April Fool's Day.
It was, and we...
I know I've said a few times around the office, it's on the 1st of April, and everybody's like, that's a really weird day, that is, to do something like that.
We set it for the first day of the financial year, April the 1st. And coming closer to it, I think we realised
we had the conversation,
April Fool's Day, and we had the conversation, do we change it because of that? No, let's make it a point of it. Let's make it an asset, really, that we've had the courage to set up on April
Fool's
Day.
Thing, will people think we're a joke? Well, we'll prove that.
Absolutely.
Yeah. So, did you disagree on things, the three of you?
Sometimes, of course.
What type? Were there particular types of things, or?
Pino disagreed with me a few times when he thought I was being a little bit wasteful with the company's money. I remember one when I agreed, without talking to him, to sponsor one of our temporary employees with his motorbike racing and have the Bridgeway logo on it. And we did sponsor him for the first year, but we never did it after that. That was a time we disagreed. But not much.
Not too much.
I suppose I was probably the most frugal out of us.
On
the other hand, it wasn't exactly a disagreement, but an indication. Just at the time we were setting up, we had advice from the business advisory service at the local authority or wherever it was.
They were given grants, weren't they, for startups? Yeah,
but it was also advice. And the guys said, me and Pino and Andy there, what are you going to do with this company? What's your expectations? And I said, well, there's three of us. We've got our skills. We'll sell our services. That's it, the three of us. And Pino sort of sat in the corner and said, I think we can do a bit better than that, Brian. And that's when I realised that his expectations were considerably greater than mine.
Yours. So in terms of the three of you, who brought what to the team in terms of that experience or skill set, would you say? What were the dynamics type of thing?
Well, if you take Andy first, Andy was a really hard worker who would go and do anything we set up to do.
He was resilient, wasn't
on
he?
the ground, the resilient one, the one that would drive through the night to do a job for you, that sort of thing. Pino, maybe more the businessman side of the business.
Yeah, probably commercial contracts.
Yeah.
But the big thing for me was, setting up the business, writing a service line offering, sorting out all the assurance stuff, having conversations around what we're going to do and what needs to be done. Andy, Brian and I would sit there and have a meeting, and then we'd agree to meet in 2-3 days, and Brian had just done it. And AJ and I would just sit there going, oh my God, we talked about this the other day, it's done. And that was, I'm ideas-y kind of guy, and I like cut and thrust and stuff, but Brian was just, Brian did move a
got it
mountain,
done. Yeah.
move a mountain on its own without any fuss, and it was, they were keys to getting us going.
It sounds like they were hard work, Brian, were they?
They were, I think, whipping us around sort of report output, report production.
Yeah, I suppose.
And you were always a better wordsmith than I was. I mean, Brian, I remember sort of when my secondment finished, this Dell computer arrived by this delivery driver, and I got it out of the box and, sat it on a desk I'd got at home, and we'd got some diving inspections to do. And I said to Brian, how many of these, how many of these do we do a day? And Brian said, you need to be doing 3 or 4 of those. I was struggling to get one done in a day. Yeah. And actually, I felt so inadequate. And I'm thinking, well, Brian would bomb these out. And so there was, we were different, but we had different skill sets.
Different skills, yeah.
We did, but complementary.
Complementary.
Yeah, and we were all very different, weren't we? I mean, in diversity terms, I think for me that was one of the key reasons why that early days of Bridgeway Structural Services, as we were then, why it worked, because we were just covering different bases.
We were, yeah.
So, what do you admire about each other?
I'll go first. For me, for me, it's Brian's just absolute rock solid ability to take on a challenge, take on some work, and just break it down into chunks and just chew through it and just get it done. And with safety cases, our assurance documentation, and all just large programs or commitments of work, getting them over the line. I've never seen. Still to this day, I've never seen anyone turn out that kind of volume and to that level of accuracy as Brian does.
Yeah, Brian.
I admire Pino's tenacity, his refusal to accept anything that wasn't right. I think that was key on the financial side in particular, because a lot of companies of our size struggled to get paid and that sort of thing. And Pino always made sure we got paid, however hard it was to do. As far as I'm aware, we never did a job that we didn't get paid for.
No.
And that was something to be said, because it was quite difficult at times.
Yeah.
So
but there was stuff to learn. Yeah, there was stuff to learn on that. I remember one point we were growing quite quick, and cash flow was getting a real problem. And I remember making an appointment. I was speaking to Andy and Brian about it, and agreeing that I would go and see the bank manager because we needed the loan.
Yeah.
And I got to the Lloyd's in the city centre in Nottingham, and the bank manager was there, but there was another guy next to him called Andy Rouse, who was like a relationship director with the bank, and he introduced him, and he's looking at our management accounts, and he said, how much of this debt that you haven't been paid is not going to arrive? And I said, all of it. It'll all get paid. Yeah. He said, well, are you sure about it? I said, yeah, every bit of all that work that we've done, we're due the money. We're not billing anybody for anything that we're not entitled to, and for work that hasn't been delivered well. And he turned around to me and said, you don't need a loan, Pino, you need a credit controller. You need to get your debt in, because this money's owed to you. Yeah. And what we were really good at was, we were doers, Brian, weren't we? We would identify some work, and we would find ways of delivering that work really well. What we weren't good at was the sort of follow-on stuff of all the ducks lined up, and we got a purchase. Do we know what the difference is between a requisition order and a purchase order? Yeah. I didn't in the early stages. Yeah. But it was that thing of having everything lined up, and companies would make a point of slow time paying, and we didn't get a loan from the bank. We just got on the phone and got debt in. To a point that I became, I was chasing it. There was a big thing around getting a credit controller into the business. I didn't feel why we needed to pay for somebody to do that job, because we've done the work and we've issued a bill. Yeah. And I went on holiday, and then when I came back, we had a credit controller.
Yeah, absolutely.
Who was the first person you employed after, obviously, the three of you?
Tim.
Was it Tim?
Yeah, probably.
Yeah.
Tim, wasn't it?
I think it was, yeah.
And Tim came into...
I mean, obviously, we had a number of people that came to us, on short-term contracts.
Yes, I think Tim was the first full-time. We did have we had people on the ground who were working with us on a 0-hour contract
Temporary
basis.
basis, yeah.
But would the first one then would have been Pete Colgan, Bryn, would it, or Ian Court, or
Mick Hatter, probably.
Mick? Well, yeah, maybe Mick. Yeah.
Mick Hatter, yeah. That was an interesting choice.
So at what point did you start to feel that the business was a success? Was there kind of like a moment where you sat down and you thought, you know what, this is going really well?
I don't think there was one moment, but...
Was getting the office, do you think that was that sort of point where we'd outgrown working from home?
Yeah, that was a point. Another point a bit further along the line, I think, was when we started to be employed directly by the major players like Railtrack.
Yeah.
That was quite a big change.
Yeah, because we were always a sub-consultant.
Yeah.
We were a subcontractor to somebody else, and then the big players started to want to just deal direct with us because they realised, as Brian mentions in his book, that actually, whenever we buy in from White Young Green or XYZ, it's always Bridgeway people. And I remember one of our clients. He wasn't a client. He was a supplier that I managed on Bradway Tunnel. Amco, very early days, they were a subcontractor to another company, and they won a contract to work with Burse to work on Mere Tunnel, do some brickwork repairs in Mere Tunnel, and we were working for Railtrack by this point. And I remember Julian Thomas from Amco saying, Pino, I need you to do this possession management for us because we've won this contract with Burse Rail, who are the framework supply in the Midlands. And I said, we can't fit it in, Julian. He would not take no for an answer. And I said, look, there's loads of agencies out there. Just pick the phone up and ring one up. And he said, no, every time we work on a project and the Bridgeway people delivering possession management and supervision, things always go to plan. He said, I need you on this job. And eventually we fitted him in, and Andy Jones took the possession. Their possessions on Mere Tunnel were taken by Andy. Yeah. Had to be, that was all we had. But Andy was really good at stuff. And
he was. Yeah.
So AJ left in, I say AJ, Andy Jones for those that don't know. But, he left in 2004 to pursue other interests outside of rail. Did the dynamics of the business change at that point?
I don't think the dynamics as such did, because Andy was already doing specific roles.
He was working
it
on
left
projects,
a big hole
it?
from the work he was doing, which we had to fill. But I don't think it affected the dynamics particularly.
No, from an operational perspective, because by that time Andy was really looking after a project which was Thames Valley Possession Management. Yeah. And then we'd built a team around him, and he was had supporting him. So he'd got Conrad Watson, who was looking after possession management as a whole, and then people like Mark Senior down in Weston. Yeah. But we missed. I mean, we missed him. Yeah. And we did a leadership trip to Rome, didn't we? So it was a celebratory.
What was the incident in the fountain? I can't just remember it at the moment.
I thought we said what happens in Rome stays in Rome.
Yes, probably best.
The Trevi Fountain, Dolce Vita, really. Apparently they've put a railing around the Trevi Fountain now, so you can't get anywhere near it.
Since then.
Yeah, in the holy water.
Yeah, it was a good trip though. So in terms of key moments or milestones, what stands out to you both? I mean, you've mentioned a few already, but are there any other really key ones?
Well, the move to Oban House was
pretty big, wasn't it? Yeah.
Yeah, I remember. I was not going to go to Beeston. I said, I won't say the word I called Beeston because it wouldn't be appropriate. But I was so determined not to go there. And then when Pino showed me Open House,
we went down there, didn't we? Yeah. We were trying to get a place on Loughborough Road.
We were, and we lost out.
We lost out. It didn't work, but
I was trying to get one in Bingham, but
but in the spirit of never wasting a crisis, that got Bryn into his cycling.
Yes,
right. So I started cycling from being 15-mile cycle ride every 15, wasn't it?
13, I think.
13-mile cycle ride.
Well, that came about because I sat in the traffic queue on University Boulevard watching the cyclists going past me on the cycle. And I thought, I've had enough of this.
You're going to do that. And still doing it now.
Still doing it now,
I mean, a big tipping points for me were those points where we, Brian, when he bumped into Terry, and all of a sudden that opened up a whole work stream. Moving to open houses, winning possession management contracts that were at with network with Railtrack and
particularly the Leeds one. I think Pino, that was so big that it
that was big, wasn't it? Yeah,
coming in at the same time as Sunderland, both together, both directly for
Sunderland
Railtrack. I mean, we must have doubled the number of people we had.
I had 2 post-its on my desk when I started at Bridgeway, and one was Leeds first and Sunderland Direct.
Sunderland Direct.
Their numbers on.
Yeah, absolutely.
And then, getting a call from Railtrack because they got a big programme of tunnel repairs that they needed to deliver, and they asked me if I'd site manage them. And it was Copenhagen Tunnel, Gasworks, Peacecliff Tunnel. They were quite. It was quite detailed work, and it was tough because Amy had won the contract, but Amy had subcontracted it to a non-rail subcontractor, and they were hard jobs to manage because these people were going to work in tunnels, and they didn't realise what they'd taken on. So I'd got my job was making sure that what they did was done safely, and that what got put up into the tunnels was going to be in good condition, and it was not an easy ride, but it was nice to get that recognition that actually, Bridgeway were the go-to company, and you ended up looking after project in like Halifax, Beacon Hill Tunnel.
Beacon Hill Tunnel,
Tunnel.
Although that was for White Young Green, but yes, it was another tunnel project.
And we've always had this ethos of kind of growing our own people, haven't we, from the start? When did the training side of things come in? When did we start training ourselves?
It was when we started picking up more possession management work because we'd won some. We were doing projects like Leeds First, and we were doing stuff like Sunderland Direct, and then we bumped into Paddy Dingwall, who was on West Coast Route Modernisation, and we were picking up some work on that. And I remember being on a research course. Andy and I decided to put ourselves on PICOP training, person in charge of possession training, because we just felt we needed to understand what the role was, because when things were going wrong, we were being told why they were going wrong, and we just needed to get close to it. So Andy and I went and did a PICOP course down in Peterborough that was delivered by Balfour Beatty. And once we'd done the course, for me, it was that thing of suddenly realising, actually, this job is, you can plan and you can deliver this work well, but you need to do your homework and you need to have a certain skill set. And then it was a point where we were buying in recertification training and going on these courses thinking this just isn't up to scratch. The quality of the training isn't good enough. The people that we've got, we're out in the marketplace trying to shop for people like Mick Hatter and other ex-British Rail people and bringing them in, and some were really good. But the industry needed far many more. And I'd done a part-time teacher training certificate at the end of my transition between being a bricklayer, an advanced craft bricklayer, and then going on to my ONC. I got asked to do some lecturing. And I could only do the lecturing in bricklaying technology if I'd enrolled on a part-time teacher training course. So I did that. And then it got to this point where, we're 3 or 4 years in, probably three years in, and we can't get enough quality people. And I just said to Brian and Andy, shall I just start training my own up? And I did. I rekindled, and we'd put an application in. Mark Senior joined the business by that point. Yeah. Mark was training. So I became a trainer, and Steve Dixon, a bunch of other Network Rail people interviewed me. It was a panel of about 4 or 5 people, grilled me on the whole ins and outs of senior PICOPing, because there was this thing where you couldn't be a senior PICOP trainer without going through a selection process, and I think I was one of the first to get through it. And I end up delivering all the safety critical grades from PTS right the way up to senior PICOP. Yeah. And really enjoyed it. And it was nice to think that we're actually creating a resource pool that's able to deliver a job well. Because if we got it wrong, if our people failed, we'd be the ones picking the phone up, wouldn't we, in the middle of the night on a Saturday night. Yeah. I remember sitting at home, I would always get a tingling feeling from about 9 o'clock. If I wasn't working myself, I'd be sat on the couch and Caroline would say, "Are you all right?" And I'd, yeah, they're all good. But it was this thing of, right, okay, how well is this weekend's work going to go? Yeah. And the more effort we put into picking the right people, training them, providing the structure and giving them that support, the better the work went and the safer it all went.
Yes, because before we did the training, we didn't... Obviously, the people we knew as individuals from BR, we knew their qualities. But then it got to the stage where other ex-BR staff were working for us who neither of us had worked with. Yeah. So it was difficult to know how good a job they were going to do.
And they were ageing as well, weren't they? I mean,
they were aging.
Demographic terms, we needed more...
And a few of them would knew their value and would want to hold you to ransom for how much they got paid. So, so for a whole lot of reasons, we had to train our own. And we were much the better for it.
We're much the better for it.
And we've continued that for 30 years.
And we've continued it right the way through. And it was, it was my journey. Brian interviewed me in 1985 for a labourer's, category 1 labourer's job at Nottingham Works Division. And I think there was a ban on recruitment. I didn't actually get a job until the spring, I don't think, of 86.
Right, that sounds about right.
Yeah, it was springtime.
Mid-80s, the railways were contracted rather than expanding, so it wasn't easy. Yeah.
But then my journey was, you're a labourer, and I mentioned to Brian, look, I'd like to become a bricklayer, and it was a case of, well, we'll see. But I was too old for an apprenticeship. But then on one shift on a Saturday night, John Daft, who was a bricklayer that I worked alongside, pulled his groin at Market Harborough Station and building these block walls the front of the block walls needed to be built so that the bricklayers could finish the back part of the cross walls, and then the planks could be installed the weekend after. And I just said, look, I can do them if they want. And John agreed for me to use his trowel and spirit level, and I whipped these walls up, and the word got back to Brian, we had a problem on Saturday night, but luckily one of your labourers pulled us out of the mire. Yeah. And Brian sort of after that said, we'll send you to college. And it was just that thing that I was able to develop, and Brian backed me. Yeah. And the industry gave me that opportunity to grow through, and it happened to me, and I like sharing that. I like passing it on. I like
and we've
seeing
done that with a lot
others,
of people, haven't we? So 2007, Brian, you retired.
I did, yes.
You did. How did that feel? Was it a big adjustment, big decision?
It was a big decision, but I was ready for it, to be honest. You get to a point where all the stress of running a company and whatever, you think, well, I don't want to do that forever. Yeah. And so, I retired and... still came back to do some work. I
was going to say, we still saw you.
It's a vast difference coming back in to be asked to do a particular project and the whole company. Yeah. And I was ready for it. Yeah.
And when Brian retired, he said, I said, well, you can do a little bit of stuff, and he said, yeah, he would. And one thing that I wanted doing was to create a training program for bridge examiners, because it was another area of the railways that was totally reliant on legacy skill sets that had come through British Rail and needed more. And Brian developed the training program. Yeah. But we didn't use it for a good while, but it was developed and it was sat there.
Ready.
But that's, it's been a game changer.
We're still using it now. It's evolved, hasn't it? We're still using it now.
And you came back and you, 3 years ago, 2-3 years ago, you revisited it and did some training as well. Mm.
So once Brian retired, Pino, you were left to run Bridgeway alone, but we're going to leave the podcast there and we're going to talk about that in our next instalment. So thanks to everybody for listening. Thanks to you both for coming along to record this podcast special. And I look forward to recording the next one with you both, where we'll talk about the next sort of chapter of Bridgeway with Pino and how it felt for him running Bridgeway by himself. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.